Welcome to today's webinar, which is on how to streamline ESOS Phase 4 and unlock real energy savings. So we're going to work through a couple of examples, but today I'm joined by Katie Elmer and my other colleague Owen Jones, both of whom are very experienced lead assessors in ESOS. And for those of you who don't know me, shame on you, but I'm George Richards, Director at JRP Solutions, and I've been here for 15 years. First slide, please, Rob. So these are the discussion points we're going to go through today. I'll give you a brief overview of JRP for those of you who don't know us. Quick refresher, and I mean a quick refresher on ESOS Phase 3 and 4. And then we'll just have a look at lessons learned from Phase 3 and action plans in particular. That'll be with Katie. And then we'll look at how two organisations have made ESOS work for them. And they're really good examples. They're from two entirely different sectors. And there's some really good lessons to be learned from there. I'll cover that off a little bit later. And then Owen will go into the ESOS Phase 4 requirements, which we all need to be aware of, and the key dates. And then we'll talk about how to prepare and get the most out of ESOS Phase 4. I think hopefully a lot of organisations have gone from viewing ESOS as being a tick in the box exercise, do it for the minimal cost and wait for another 4 years before we do anything at all, to trying to get the most out of it. And I think the examples I go through really shows you how that can be done. And then if we have time at the end, we'll take a few questions and hopefully answer those to your satisfaction. But any that go unanswered, we'll try and get back to you separately post presentation. This webinar is due to last for an hour, but if we can finish it earlier, then great. I'm sure we'd all like a few extra minutes on our lunch breaks. So without further ado, do you want to give me the next slide, please? So for those of you who don't know who we are, we're not new kids on the block. We've been around for over 25 years now, and we're regarded as being the UK's leading independent net zero outsourcing specialists. We are uniquely practical and pragmatic and highly experienced. We worked across all sectors for a long, long time. And as you can tell by my hairstyle, I've been here for longer than been in the business for more than 25 years. It does give us a unique insight because we understand the conflicting priorities. We don't look at energy or carbon in isolation. We look at it within its context of its working environment. So we understand some of the challenges that all organisations face. And about 6-7 years ago, we were engaged and evolved into a broader ESG net zero business, very much at the behest of our clients. And we've been engaged by, I think, about 55, 60 of those clients to help them develop meaningful and practical net zero strategies and subsequently help them to deliver elements of those strategies. But we don't just talk the talk, we also walk the walk. We're a B Corp certified organisation, have been for a number of years, and we will be net zero by 2030. And in terms of ESOS, we've delivered over 500 ESOS audits across all the phases, and we are currently already delivering the site audits for a number of clients for Phase 4. As you can see there's a selection of some of the people we work with, some of whom we've worked with for 8, 9, 10 years, and continue to work with in numerous aspects, not just around ESOS. Next slide, please. So without going into too much detail, but from a top level down, these are our 6 core service lines. Asset management, funny enough, is where it's our first big piece of work we did for Rolls-Royce, where we helped them to develop and then implement a facilities management outsourcing strategy across EMEA. And then subsequently became their UK energy manager for 15 years. But energy management is really where it's at the heart of the business. And then, as I said, 5-6 years ago, we expanded that, upskilled, recruited, and used our partnership network to then help clients with their net zero and ESG aspirations. Underpinning all of that is data. And people who've heard me present before will get fed up with me talking about data. Um, Data just underpins everything you do. Without good quality data, you're working in the dark. And I think Katie and Owen will probably touch on it later in terms of that even after what this will be the fourth phase of ESOS, data is still often one of the biggest challenges we have with our clients in terms of getting the right data and the right quality data. But it's important not just for compliance, obviously, but for reporting as well, and for understanding what's going on in your own organizations from an energy and carbon perspective. Next slide, please. So a very quick refresher on ESOS. Next slide, please. Literally one slide. And I think the image there probably sums up how we certainly felt and a lot of our clients felt during phase three, with the constant changes going on and delays that we experienced. It increased the time that was necessary to actually meet the changing regulations. And obviously that incurred more cost for us and for our clients. And in actual fact, for those of you that are of the belief that ESOS is a goldmine for companies like ourselves, under phase three, it was anything but. It cost us money because we didn't feel we could pass on all the additional costs to our clients. So yes, we're glad to say that there are no major changes under phase four, but again, Owen will touch on that. But the major changes between phase two and phase three included the de minimis threshold changing from 10% to 5%. So that meant that some companies or some organizations had to include more site audits or had to include their transport audit for the first time. Also, what was introduced was energy intensity matrices, and that was an additional requirement even for those that had ISO 50001, whereas that was just, yeah, okay, you don't need to do ESOS. There was still some work needed to be doing, even to be done, even if you had ISO 50001. And of course, the big addition was the introduction of action plans. Now, whilst there's still no mandatory obligation on anyone to actually implement any of the energy conservation measures identified through the audit process, this is another step towards it because it's putting it in the spotlight and saying, right, what do you intend to do, and what does that look like? Now, again, we'll talk a little bit more about action plans later, but it really did mean that organizations had to think about, well, okay, we got these ECMs, what are we going to do? Because if we don't do anything at all, which you can still do, you can still say, no, we're not going to do anything. But whatever you do put in your plan, you need to make sure it happens within a year or give a very valid reason why it hasn't. So, yeah, caution, I would say, was probably the key word at the time. But as you get more used to it and have more confidence in your ability to implement, then I think they'll become a bit more useful and more robust. And of course, then alongside those action plans was for the first time an annual progress review. So that has to be done every December. So you submit your action plan and then you put a progress update every year into the EA. Just touch on a couple of key dates. The qualification date is the 31st of December this year. The qualification date is important for two reasons. One, because whatever shape your organization is at that point in time is what's going to be subject to the audit. And it's also the date that has to be included in what's called your reference period. So that's the 12 months period whereby we use your data for compliance. Now, that can be a different data set to the one that we use for the physical audits, because the physical audits we can do now, as we already are for some clients. So I would strongly suggest cracking on with your audits as soon as possible. But when it comes to the data set, it has to include the 31st of December. So whether that's this calendar year or whether it's from the 31st of December or the 30th of December this year to the following year, well, actually wouldn't work, would it? But 1st of December to 1st of December would work. So whatever data set you use for that reference period, you've got to include that date. Okay. And then, of course, the big one is the compliance deadline, which is December next year. Now, that still may seem a long way off for some of you, but it's only next year. And I think for those of you that participated in ESOS before, you'll know that there's always that last minute dash where, and we were even doing phase three audits as recently as Q4 last year, because people either didn't know, weren't aware, people had moved on and hadn't had an effective handover. And Katie will talk about the fines that are now being imposed by the EA, which has always sat there in the background for non-compliant companies or non-compliant audits, but now it's becoming a lot more serious and they are imposing fines and they are prosecuting. Next slide, please. And now I'm handing over to Katie to talk about some of the lessons from phase 3.
Thanks, George. Yeah, morning, everyone. Next slide, please, Rob. So, yeah, thanks for that sort of recap. And before we move on to phase 4, I think it's really important to be open about what phase 3 actually meant in practice without being too negative. As George mentioned, there was a hell of a lot of disruption to our business and others. Due to loads of factors, we saw a sharp increase in late changes to the scope of ESOS, repeated data requests, resubmissions, urgent remediations, tight deadlines, enforcement activity. Also, was the deadline extension was due to the EA's database being upgraded as well, of course, and then the addition of action plans. And yeah, as George mentioned, financially, this really translated into increased cost and pressure on margins on our side as a consultant and on the side of organisations. And a lot of it was driven by reactive work that just hadn't been anticipated right at the start. And it was a bit of resourcing nightmare. And as George said, we are doing a lot of, well, we have been doing a lot of late ESOS phase 3s up until now, actually. So yeah, that experience is kind of a key reason why we're sort of being clear today about what worked, what didn't, and then how phase 4 needs to be approached, which shall be dealt with later. Next slide, please. Action plans, yeah, they came on a bit later. They're a really positive step in principle, but in practice they proved really challenging for a lot of organisations. What are they? The guidance came out late. There was a template published by the Environment Agency, but we still needed to guide all of our customers through the process and help build our own or help them build their own template so it made sense to their business. And a big issue we saw was lack of strategic alignment. In a lot of cases, action plans were treated, as was ESOS in general, as a compliance output. I mean, this is down to rushing and being rushed rather than being embedded within the wider business priorities. So capital planning, net zero strategies, which is what they're designed to be and will be, I'm sure, in phase 4. We saw a lot of delay between audit completion, internal approval and implementation. Reduced momentum in some cases resulted in missed savings, including those valuable low cost or no cost opportunities. And another challenge, lack of clear ownership. In some action plans, there was no responsibility for delivery, no budget set, actions stalled, and they'll go into next year. But you can update the action plan as you go along, and there is a progress report at the end of every year. A good trend, which was positive and which we really encouraged, we did urge a lot of organisations to prioritise fewer actions that they were confident that would happen. Don't have a whole shopping list out there because it goes in the public domain, and it could go under board scrutiny as well. So where that approach was taken, we have seen that action plans were a lot more effective and things were getting checked off, which is good. So next slide, please. So yeah, there were quite a clear set of risk areas that did emerge from phase 3, which was to be expected. and they're common across the board, which I've listed on this slide, and across all sectors. And all of these issues were the ones that most often led to delay, rework, enforcement activity, increased cost, headache, teeth pulling, all of that. One of the big risks was a lot of organisations were just not fully clear on why they qualified or which legal entities were in scope. And that was worsened by the fact that we also saw a number of new entrants to phase 3. They often found the whole thing very confusing, which is to be expected. And then a few organisations who were unaware that they were actually in phase 2 but hadn't done it, or were new in scope due to organisational changes, mergers, buyouts, business growth. So that lack of clarity often delayed things. And we had a lot of cases where organisations were raising disputes from their lawyers with the Environment Agency. They'd had an enforcement notice, they'd had a fine, they wanted us to do the audits, but all this was still going on as well. Also saw recurring issues around organisation boundaries. Who's the highest parent? That's still a question. Oh, that's a holding company, yeah, but it's still the highest parent. There's no staff number, it's still the highest parent. But our parents in Guernsey, it's just getting that conversation clear. Sometimes there's a lot of pushback. What subsidiaries are in, which sites, what individual assets. They were all common. Do you have any transport? No. New sites just springing out of nowhere mid-assessment. Oh, found a load of transport here. They were issues. A big one is representative sampling methodologies and audit covering. It's got to be genuinely representative of an organisation's area of significant energy consumption. Sampling can't just be justified solely on a percentage basis, and it can't be a mechanism to reduce any sort of audit effort, especially where material differences exist between sites, activities or assets. So in our experience of reviewing ESOS assessments, we found these shortcomings in sampling methodologies. We think, well, we've rendered them as non-compliant. And even in discussions sort of pre-qualification, at the proposal stage, yeah, we when we've done a bit of a scoping session, we're just not happy to go ahead with anything that's just the bare minimum, that's just not representative. So sort of a few sort of broad examples. So where you've got large multi-site estates, hundreds of locations, proposing to sample only a small number of sites, because maybe that's what they did in phase 1 and phase 2, and it's fine. Clumping them together geographically for convenience, despite quite a lot of variation across the estate. So mix of owned and leased buildings, different ages, uses, tenures, operating hours. Mixed use portfolio, so you've got industrial logistics office sites treated as broadly equivalent for sampling purposes, totally different energy profiles. Retail and hospitality estate, where sampling focused mainly on newer or more efficient sites that were owned, forgetting older, more crumbly, higher energy sites not adequately represented, which these in theory could have the most opportunities. And then things like transport energy be included in the 95%, but not really adequately reflected in the sampling approach or audit coverage. Early lead assessor engagement, late mobilisation and delays has often been linked to late engagement of a decent lead assessor. It's really important securing one of these at the start, so now, ideally. Late they're in short supply, especially if they're need sector specific experience. So yeah, it's really important to select yours now. And yeah, George's favourite topic, verifiable data. This is so important. This is one of, if not the biggest practical challenges throughout phase 3. It's huge. It's a major driver of delay, rework, non-compliance risk. And I do understand the scope had changed. There was metrics, there was all sorts of other things that crept in. So yeah, additional requirements. But the main issues, not least, organisations working to the wrong reporting period, gaps in consumption data that were not identified early enough, hadn't been resolved, things delivered too late, data held across multiple systems and teams, arriving late in inconsistent formats. Transport data has always kind of been particularly problematic. Grey fleet fuel cards, mileage data sat outside core energy reporting processes, going back to lying with different teams. And then data that can't be verified. In a lot of cases, we do have to make sort of best case estimations. It is unavoidable, but it has to be transparent, it has to be traceable, and we have to understand that this is what we need to do from the start. It's no point in this coming in late, because again, late discovery of poor data, it just adds to delays, increases compliance risk. And not only that, ESOS is designed to be useful, and it reduces the usefulness of the audit outputs. It's not very meaningful if the data's poor. So in our experience, the organisations that were most successful were those that treated their data preparation as an early deliberate step. Okay, the ones that did phase 1 and 2 were probably had their houses in order, but that's not always the case. But yeah, if we can validate the data set up front, agree any assumptions early, so what we think needs to be scoped out, what we think needs to be estimated, and be clear on what and wasn't available, and have a really well-defined justification as to why. Strong governance and ownership was really key as well, because changes in key personnel also created quite a big headache. Even when they've done phase 1 and phase 2, sometimes it's laid with 1 or 2 people, and some people have just disappeared. And where that ESOS knowledge sat with individuals rather than within a clear governance structure, the continuity gets lost, and particularly during periods of organisational change, so buyouts, mergers, that sort of thing. People move to different departments. So again, yeah, early engagement with the director responsible for sign-off, clear ownership, these all made a really big difference during phase 3. And then finally on this slide, where time became tight, action plans were, as I mentioned, treated as reporting exercise. And I know they came in and it was very rushed and hurried, but again, we promoted more of a light, more confident touch. So again, those that focused on gave most value to realistic actions with clear ownership and delivery, were the winners in this case. Next slide, please. So some nice statistics for you. This looks at ESOS opportunities identified across our ESOS phase 3 client base. It is a really helpful one because it challenges a really common assumption. Most meaningful energy savings require major capital investment. Yeah, great if you've got the budget and you've got that in plan. But one of the clearest lessons from phase 3 is it's not true. just having a quick look across our data set, the median payback period is around 1.75 years. This is simple payback. And the average is approximately 3 years out of all those opportunities. And it tells us that while there are some longer term capital projects in the mix, so there's a big chunk of solar, quite a large proportion of savings come from measures with no or relatively short, very short paybacks. So that's got really important implications for how organisations approach ESOS and action plans. So yeah, if you look across the categories, a significant proportion of savings come from other and behavioural. Many of the opportunities were identified about using existing systems better. Particularly important lesson sits in the other category, and it's not a catch-all negative woolly category. It's where we saw the cumulative impact of lots of small practical actions, and often they were bundled into one for a whole estate. So it's things like using systems better, BMS, HVAC control optimization, compressed air pressure reduction, maintenance and scheduling improvements, space rationalization, behavior change initiatives. And individually, these measures don't look that transformational, but if you're thinking about, you know, looking across a very large estate, they do become really material. Many are low risk, low cost, and like I said, can be bundled together into sensible programs of work that can be put nice and seamlessly into the action plan. So yeah, just to go on to behaviour change, which is also quite a nice slice on its own and features quite strongly in the data. Just simple actions, clearer shutdown procedures, tighter temperature controls, better handover between teams, training. These regularly delivered meaningful savings, and they're really, really popular with our customers. And they're really attractive. They can just be implemented straight away. Don't rely on long approval cycles, pay back straight away. And then, yeah, one consistent lesson from phase 3 was just sustaining any of these savings, especially these low cost measures, because just got to keep on top of them and make sure the momentum's kept up and make sure people are still doing them, otherwise they go off the boil. So the organisations that truly locked into the benefits were the ones that turned their most manageable opportunities into structured owned action plans, going back to the 2 previous slides, with clear responsibility and follow through. So I think what phase 3 showed us was, the challenge isn't finding the opportunities. We can find absolutely loads. It's making them stick, it's making them realistic, and it's giving them a home. Next slide, please. So we did see an increase in enforcement activity during phase 3, and yeah, there is a published list, and it's 36 and counting at the moment, a variety of fines on there. It wasn't unexpected, because obviously ESOS has been going for several years now, and whilst phase 3 was disrupted, but expectations around compliance were a lot clearer, the fines and all of that, and the Environment Agency has placed a lot more emphasis on organisations meeting deadlines, following the requirements properly, rather than treating it as a one-off informal exercise. So there is a lot less tolerance for late submission and incomplete compliance. I'll go on to the next slide. So the penalties in practice, the table on the slide gives a sense of the types of breaches and the scale of penalties. So failed to notify, missing records, and then to the biggest one, the whole non-disclosure. So ranging from a couple of grand to 50 with additional daily penalties. So yeah, a lot. And then obviously it gets publicly reported. We did see a lot of penalties applied for issues that were really straightforward, entirely avoidable as well. Late engagement, unclear responsibility, disputes and qualification. I mean, a lot of it wasn't deliberate. A lot of it, like I said, newcomers, lack of handover, all of that, bad governance. So we did see one particular example. It was like a 10 grand fine just for missing this submission deadline. I mean, that could have been avoided because there's plenty of enforcement notices flying about. But a point to note that enforcement, it's not just about fines. It's not just about financial penalty. It's reputational risk. This goes out into the public domain. And then it also does and would lead to senior level scrutiny internally. It would get escalated to board level, but I would say that's, if it hasn't really been addressed seriously before, I would say that's a good thing as well, to give it more visibility. So I think the organisations that avoided enforcement tended to do a few things well: planned early, clear accountability, treated ESOS as an actual management process. It's embedded into the business rather than a last minute task. And I don't think it was about catching people out. It was about expectations being clearer and the deadlines being taken a bit more seriously. And I think as we go into ESOS phase 4, that will be a lot more apparent. Next slide, please. Like I said, yeah, there's a clear shift in approach from the Environment Agency, which reflects the maturity of the scheme, less tolerance of delays, greater scrutiny of submissions. They have a clearer database. They're heavily scrutinising organisation structures. Enforcement notices are going out to subsidiaries. They're looking at audit coverage, admin. They're not just simply checking to see if a submission has been made by the deadline. They're taking a much deeper dive. There has been more guidance, although it's been drip fed through phase 3, so it hasn't been that clear. But because we've seen more enforcement outcomes rather than missed late for the deadline, it's reduced a lot of ambiguity around what compliance looks like. And I think there's more case studies out there in the public domain as well. And I think it gives organisations more certainty of what they need to do and what they'll expect if they don't do it. So less scope for misunderstanding or informal interpretation. Overall, it's not one of increased risk, but it's more clarity. So those that didn't plan early, submit on time and maintain a clear audit trail were not that well placed for phase 3. And now it's being regulated as more of an established scheme rather than a new or transitional scheme. Next slide, please. So, yeah, just to conclude, none of this is new. And it's also important to say, yeah, no one be hard on themselves. It was a really unusually challenging for everyone involved. Deadlines were extended, scope expanded, guidance continued to evolve, even for organisations that started really early and were well prepared, found themselves under pressure, and so were we. Yeah, where organisations had struggled, in most cases, it wasn't because they hadn't tried or hadn't engaged. It was one or more of the fundamentals that weren't fully in place early enough. And a lot of the time, it was for reasons out of their control. So, what phase three told us was organisations who did cope best, they weren't necessarily doing anything clever or complex. They were the ones, just to reiterate, they had clear qualification and scope, reasonably or really robust data, defined ownership, shared understanding of what the action plan was meant to achieve, and a really decent audit team and lead assessor who really understood the business. So yeah, starting early didn't remove all of the challenges, as we all know, but it did give organisations more flexibility to absorb change, respond to evolving requirements, and stay in control rather than reacting at the end, which is what we want to avoid. Thanks ever so much. I'm going to hand you over to George, who is going to go through a couple of case studies.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Yeah, some good lessons learned there from phase three, without a doubt, and hopefully we can take those forward into phase four and make phase four really work for you. That's the whole point of today's discussion. We're going to spend a few minutes just looking at how two organisations have really made ESOS work for them. Next slide, please, Rob. So the first of those is Greencore. For those of you who don't know Greencore, they are a food manufacturing company. They provide things like sandwiches and wraps and things like that to major food retailers like M&S, Sainsbury's, etc., and food service companies. And to make matters more interesting for phase four, they've literally on Sunday finally completed the purchase of Bakkavor, who make complementary food products, desserts and sauces, etc., dips, things like that. So they've become a lot bigger. But ignoring that for the moment, looking at what they've done with phase three, we did their audits for them. We ended up auditing more sites than was required from a sampling perspective. But that was because Greencore wanted to make the most of the opportunity. Their view was, if we're going to have to do 10 sites, there are other sites that we'd also like you to include. So we did, and we ended up auditing 15 sites altogether. And as a result of that, we identified savings of about £6.3 million a year, which is significant, representing an 18% reduction in energy consumption, and a reduction of over 15,000 tons of CO2 equivalent as well. So fantastic on the face of it. However, we all know that in reality, you're never going to implement all of those projects because of various challenges and barriers. And even with the best intentions in the world, it's quite difficult. However, having said that, we looked at 15 sites. And we did it in phases. So we would have regular meetings with Greencore, and we'd feed back the findings from the physical site audits every couple of months. So they then took those opportunities and said, brilliant, like the numbers, we need to do these. And in some instances, our experience was that Owen was leading the audit process, and I remember him saying that he'd get to the next batch of sites and they were already implementing things that he'd identified from previous site audits that were replicable on those sites. So that was brilliant. That was really good proactive work by Greencore. One of the major opportunities there was behaviour change. And to be honest, we find behaviour change is an opportunity with every organisation we work with to some degree or another, even those that are quite, or could be considered quite mature in terms of how they manage their energy. So going forward, of course, the challenge is going to be that they're an even bigger entity now because they've recently purchased Bakkavor. So it's going to be interesting to see which of those sites will be going and auditing. Some of their key challenges, and this is, I'd like to thank Greencore and also Circle Health, which is the next case study, for providing me their feedback. This is coming from them. This isn't our words. It's sort of a combination of the two, if you like, our experiences and theirs. One of their key challenges was availability of good quality data. They're a growing business, and obviously, as a manufacturer, their primary focus is getting their products out the door on time, to quality, and at the right price. That's their number one priority. At the same time as this audit process was going on and has continued ever since, they've been fortunate enough to have increased production. So that again brings its own conflicting priorities, if you like, because as I said, their number one priority is getting stuff out the door. When you've got demanding clients, customers like Tesco's and Sainsbury's, etc., and M&S. And the other thing that they found was a key challenge was where they had uh, technical projects they wanted to implement quickly, that they found that a lot of the suppliers weren't able to move at the pace that they wanted them to. Now, whether that was because they were in big demand or just because they didn't necessarily have the right suppliers in their supply chain, I don't know. But interesting one to come up with. What will they do differently for phase four? And this is their words, not ours. They'll focus their effort on the most energy intensive sites. They'll get their data in better shape, which I think is a running theme. And what they'll also do, because they're large enough to do it, is they'll have a dedicated resource to drive implementation at site level. Okay. Next slide, please. And now Circle Health, obviously healthcare company, one of the largest private healthcare companies, their key client being the NHS. We identified annual savings of over £2 million across their estate and carbon savings of over 560 tonnes per annum. We audited 9 sites, and the good news is, or the key deliverable, I guess, is the opportunities they've already implemented have saved over £600,000 per annum and reduced their CO2 by 488 tonnes to date. Now, they haven't implemented all the opportunities yet. They're in the process. I think they've just signed a corporate solar PPA agreement. So that's really good. But they prioritise the ECNs with attractive ROIs. Their key challenges included their growing business, so growing through acquisition. They're part of Pure Health now. And they found that a lack of awareness of their ESG agenda throughout the organisation, but particularly at site level, was lacking. And of course, they also had a change of ownership about 2 years ago. All of that didn't help things. What are they going to do? What are they doing differently for phase four? Because they are one of the clients we're already doing their audits, early engagement, which they're clearly doing, regular progress reviews. So we have diarised with them. I think it's a monthly catch up, just to feed back issues, challenges, and the opportunities that we've already spotted, so they can start to implement some of those opportunities, as Greencore had done last time. And they've looked to improve their communication with sites and throughout the organisation. Okay, so some really good, interesting lessons learned there, but certainly early engagement and implementation of opportunities at the earliest point is a good one. And again, behaviour change is another opportunity there, but they're already dealing with that one, so that's great. Next slide, please. Over to you, Owen. We're running a little bit behind time, so.
Yeah, well, this is this should be a fairly quick section. So this is really just a recap of what hopefully most people on the webinar already know. So it's just really looking at what the qualification criteria for ESOS is. So you need to have at least one legal entity that either has more than 250 employees or has a turnover in excess of £44 million and an annual balance sheet in excess of £38 million. So if one of the legal entities in your organisation within the UK has either of those, then you will need to do ESOS. And as part of that, you will need to audit a sample, a representative sample of 95% of your energy use, or that energy use needs to be covered by ISO 50001 accreditation. Okay, next slide, please. So here's just a simple timeline that gives you, the key dates that you need to be thinking about. So the first one, 6th of December 2023, that's actually when phase 4 started. What this means is any audits you've done since the 6th of December 2023 can be used towards your phase 4 compliance. And we've actually got a lot of clients, Circle Health being one of them, who are already doing audits and already getting the opportunities back and acting on those, those opportunities that have been identified. The next date to think about is actually 5th of December this year, which is the second action plan, phase 3 action plan update that needs to be submitted. So you need to be submitting where you are with your action plan opportunities, and what you've completed and what you haven't completed. And then the next major one is 31st of December 2026, which is the qualification date. So if you meet the criteria on the 31st of December 2026, then you will need to do ESOS. Then what we should get is some updated compliance or some guidance from the Environment Agency beginning of December beginning of the year 2027 to qualify the small number of changes that are happening in the scheme for phase 4. Compliance deadline 5th of December 2027, so that's when you need to have all of your ESOS completed for, and then we've got action plan submissions for phase 4, which start in December 2028, needs to be in by, and then there's the updates in 29 and 30. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of changes from phase 3. There's not been a lot of changes. So initially, the consultation, the government was going to refocus the scheme in phase 4 to cover net zero as well as energy efficiency, and also was going to change the qualification thresholds so that better aligned with SECR. However, those have been put on hold at least until phase 5. So what the changes are for phase 4 is they've removed or passed the legislation to remove display energy certificates and Green Deal assessments as compliance routes. Green Deal assessments haven't existed for years, so that really makes no difference. But if you have used display energy certificates in the past for your ESOS compliance, they are no longer a valid way of doing it in phase 4. So you will need to look at either doing audits or having ISO 50001 coverage. The other thing that's going to need to be done is you will need to submit, as part of your ESOS phase 4 submission, you will need to say what your progress has been against the actions that you committed to from your phase 3 action plan. And if you haven't achieved what you said you would achieve, you will then have to explain why you haven't achieved it. For those changes, those sort of 2 small changes really about the action plan and the action plan submissions, there will be some updated guidance issued beginning of 2027. The other thing to mention is some new PAS standards have been issued around energy and decarbonisation assessments. Initially, these were intended to inform for when it was a requirement to cover net zero within ESOS. As that is no longer a requirement, you can do it voluntarily, but it's not a legal requirement at the moment. They're not as significant, but it's worth probably that may likely be a requirement in phase 5. So it's possibly worth getting comfortable and with those standards so you understand what potentially you might have to do in phase 5. Next slide, please. So I'll pass back to George now. He's going to talk to you about how to prepare and get the most out of ESOS phase 4.
Thanks, Owen. Yeah, you'll be tired of hearing my voice and seeing my face by the time this webinar finishes, which will be in approximately 10 minutes. So I'll be quick. I'm just mindful of time. Next slide, please. So I think I don't want to be too repetitive, but I think there's some important lessons to be learned from all previous phases, particularly phase 3. Engaging the right lead assessor early to ensure their availability. And by right lead assessor, how do I mean that? Make sure that they're knowledgeable and experienced in your particular sector where possible, because you'll get greater insights and they'll deliver greater value for you. Data, we banged on about that, but it's really important to make sure the data is available. If you're not sure where to go, then talk to your colleagues, get them involved in the discussion in the first instance, get that early engagement, because it may come from different parts of your organisation. And another key thing apart from data is make sure you understand your corporate structure, the whole legal entity, because we've had a number of instances where we've had out-of-date organisation charts, and then midway through the audit process, we go, oh, we found this one, and there's another business over here that needs to be included. So yeah, just try and make sure you get that early organisation chart, make sure it's up to date, and it includes all your full property portfolio with as much information as you can, because that will inform the representative sampling approach. So as Katie touched upon earlier, that is a big area of ambiguity to an extent, but I think at the end of the day, common sense needs to prevail, and it needs to be truly representative of the property portfolio and how energy is being used across that property portfolio, where you're a multiple site organisation. And try and engage with the director or responsible person who will sign off the ESOS evidence pack, because that's a requirement, a legal requirement. Because one, it helps, they're busy people. And secondly, it'll help you to buy into the opportunities being identified and hopefully get those implemented sooner rather than later. Next slide, please. Okay, so data. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide. It's so important to get that in a good place. We can help you to do that, but yeah, getting your data in a good place, making it full and accurate and complete is really, really important. Particularly, well, no, not particularly, around all aspects of it. It's important for ESOS, for compliance, for reporting, and it's also important because without it, you are operating in the dark. So if you need any hand with that, then we can give you some help to get that in a better place. But yeah, look at your data and make sure it's full and complete. Next slide, please. In fact, someone asked a question in the questions, which I just noticed, about accuracy of energy savings. Is it important to have the projects where you've implemented them to have metered energy data to ensure accuracy of savings? No, it's not, but why wouldn't you? I would recommend metering it, because if you don't meter it before and afterwards, how do you know what it's actually saved? And if you take the word of the supplier of that kit, of course, it's going to tell you it's working brilliantly, but you need to know for yourself, because it helps with your investment decisions in the future. It'll certainly make the conversation with the finance department a lot easier when you can clearly demonstrate that it has saved money, it has given you a good return on investment. So yeah, data is absolutely critical. Yeah, so maximizing ESOS and opportunity, early engagement, as you've seen from a couple of examples I shared earlier. Get the physical audits done ASAP. And the reason why I say that, mainly because you can start implementing the things, particularly the low cost, no cost opportunities, get them done, start reducing your energy consumption, your costs. But moreover, if you're going to appoint the right lead assessor, their availability is going to be limited as the compliance date gets nearer and nearer. And what I mean by that, in the last 6 months, or the 6 months prior to the compliance date, we and everyone else gets so busy. If you want to use a credible lead assessor that's good for you, then get them appointed early. You can do the audits this year, and we can finish off the reports Q1 onwards next year. But you'll get it done. You'll get it done properly. Yeah, there's lots of learnings to be had here, lots of which we've already touched upon. Setting things like internal carbon price will help to improve investment payback. You can include that. But also, I think we can touch on a couple of challenges that people have found around finance and resource in a moment. So do you want to move on to the next slide? Yeah, the ESOS action plan. The update is due for phase 3 action plan by the 5th of December this year. It gives you a real focus and implementation of good ECMs. It doesn't mean you have to do anything at all, because you write an action plan that says, actually, fact, we intend to do nothing. Or you can do what Green Corps did, and they put 70 opportunities in there because they were that confident that they were already implementing them or would have them implemented within 12 months, which is amazing. Not many organisations out there can do that. They don't have the wherefore or the focus or the resource to do it, but it can be done. But think carefully about what you're going to include. And there are things in there you might say, well, I don't have the money. There are alternative financial delivery mechanisms like PPAs, etc., that can be used to deliver these things. And most importantly, verify the results. Going back to data, verify the results, because you become more credible. It's easier to get the money to invest for future similar investment opportunities, and celebrate your success. Share that and communicate it throughout the organization. Next slide, please. So yeah, it's me again. Practical tools and next steps. So next slide, please. Yeah, so I mean, this is a tool that we developed alongside Rolls-Royce some years ago. And the idea of this, and there are other tools out there where you've got lots of projects, lots of ECMs. It's then, how do you prioritize them? Which ones do you do first, and why are you doing them? And also, when you are implementing them or they're going through the development stage, you'll have different key stakeholders requiring information about those. Where are you at with this? Who's doing what? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Where can we replicate it? Systems like Project Activator will do that reporting for you automatically. Once the data's in there, you can basically produce any report you want. That keeps your key stakeholders happy. It means that you're not having to produce different reports for different people at different times. And it's a live system, so enables you to give real-time data in there. You update it, and it will spew out. So when variables change, like the cost of energy, the internal cost of carbon, whatever it might be, that will automatically update all the projects that are in there, and will then suddenly change that some that didn't meet your investment criteria suddenly do. Next slide, please. And if you haven't got the time or people to implement some of the opportunities, then again, there is help out there. We have an on-site energy management support service, which is flexible. It can be turned on and off, and it can be used for any aspect of energy management, just to give you a helping hand, fill in those gaps if necessary. So it could be anything around project implementation, BMS audit and optimization, training, ISO 50001, renewables. Whatever it is where you're struggling and need that bit of expertise, that bit of help, then it's there. We can put boots on the ground and help you. Next slide, please. And equally, as I've already mentioned, if you don't have the money available, and even where there is a capital pot, quite often, particularly in manufacturing, you're always in competition with production, who always want to buy new kit. And that quite often will be prioritized over anything energy or carbon related. However, there are other vehicles, as I've mentioned. There's things like PPAs, there's asset finance, there's energy as a service. Energy savings can also pay for things, so people, we can enter into agreements whereby, and we can help you with all that, to look at what's the best option for you, which projects do you want to implement, and how are you going to do it. If you use your own money, you can use asset finance, you're going to use a PPA or an energy as a service agreement. We can help you to come up with informed decision, look at those options, see which is the best one for you and the most acceptable. But the first conversation needs to be had internally is, what's your culture towards any sort of third-party funding? Because if it's an absolute no, don't bother. But if, we're interested, we want to know what our options are, then we can help you with that options appraisal, and even help you negotiate the right contracts, which is, can be a nightmare for some people, but we've been doing this for a long, long time. So if you need help in that regard, just, reach out. Next slide, please. Yeah, and behavior change. It's a really untapped opportunity in almost every organization I've ever encountered. And it'll vary from organization to organization in terms of the size, the complexity, the prevailing culture. Whether it's an organization that's going through acquisition, therefore you've got different cultures. Whether you've got legacy systems that haven't really been looked at, whether you've got a focused energy management system in place. All those things, but in every single instance, behavior change is a real opportunity. And you can go the whole hog through ENCO, which is a broad behavior change program, which has really good results and demonstrable savings that have been achieved through numerous different organizations. And there are tools that support that. So things like Be Energy, which we developed, which is an e-learning course, a modular e-learning course, which can be customized to your own specific organization, or there's a generic one, but that just helps to change people's behaviors on a day-to-day basis, because as Katie touched on earlier, the cumulative impact of the small things, the things that within that other segment, that can make a real difference. And guess what? It's almost no cost to do it as well. It's very, very low cost investment, and a very, very high return on investment. So if you've not looked at behavior change to any degree, please look at it. It'll give you a very, very good return and will make a significant difference to you. Next slide, please. So next steps, and this is my last slide. Step one, appoint the right lead assessor for you. Do not select on cost alone, because you'll get what you pay for. And ask the question, will they guarantee compliance? You know, we do, but not everyone does. And that's really important, because this is a compliance thing first and foremost. You need to be sure that you're going to be compliant at the end of the day. Data, we've touched on many times, and organization chart, make sure that's up to date. Ensure availability of an informed site contact. This is really important. So crack on with the site audits once you've appointed your lead assessor. But make sure there's an informed site contact there, because there's nothing more frustrating if our auditor turns up and there's someone there who's just joined the company, doesn't know the site, doesn't know anything at all, doesn't have keys for plant rooms, things like that. That's very frustrating, and it means that we won't do such a good job on the day. So we'll ask you for information in advance, and we will ask that there is someone on site who knows the site well enough and can add value during that site visit. And the ESOS report, I would always say we'll present back the report. So we'll give you a copy of it in advance, and we'll present back to your key stakeholders. Ensure where you can that your key stakeholders are invited to that presentation, because whilst they might not have been involved in the mechanics of the ESOS audit, the implementation of the ECMs will impact all parts of that business, whether it's procurement or operations or production or whatever. So make sure that you get representatives from across the organization. And most importantly, implement and prioritize the no-cost, low-cost ECMs. So things like the behavior change stuff, the optimization of controls, things like that, because they'll give you great return on investment, and you can do them straight away. You don't have to wait for business cases or anything else. Just do it. And consider alternative financial mechanisms. So if capital isn't readily available to you, there are people out there, and we can help you through that. What can be a minefield if you try and do it for the first time, we can help you through that. Find the right partners, find the right financial mechanisms to help you deliver as many of the ECMs as possible. And importantly, verify the results. So metered data is always best, but it just makes life easier going forward. And besides which, why wouldn't you want to know what the actual results were? Of course you would. So really, really important. And I think that's my last slide. It is. I'm sorry we don't have time for any more questions or to answer them here. We've overrun slightly, having promised we'd try and finish early. So apologise for that. Thank you for attending. If you do want any help or information on any aspect of what we've spoken about today, then please reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to help you. Thank you.